Comedian Jon Stewart recently weighed in on the Joe Rogan Spotify controversy. So now on his podcast, Stewart actually does push back and defends Joe Rogan a little bit, not on the COVID misinformation, but on the calls to deplatform. And so I'm going to show you a little bit of that, and then I'm going to weigh in with my opinion. Take a look.
Don't leave, don't abandon, don't censor, engage. I'm not saying it's always going to work out fruitfully, but I'm always of the mindset that engagement, and especially with someone like a Joe Rogan, who is not, in my mind, an ideologue in any way. And here's the other thing. Like, you're a musician. Like, how much misinformation is spread by, like, Eric Clapton is on platforms that you're on, and he's a fucking psycho. So do you remove yourself from every platform? My point is, we all exist in this world and on this planet. And there's no question that there is egregious misinformation that's purposeful and hateful and all those other things. And that being moderated is a credit to the platforms that run them. But this overreaction to Rogan, I think, is a mistake. I think there are dishonest, bad actors in the world. And identifying those is so much more important to me. And I also think sometimes those grand gestures of, I'm removing myself, doesn't necessarily take into account, like, you're on Comcast, right? Comcast or Time Warner. So if you're on any cable station, right, they've got Fox News on. You telling me Fox News isn't a willful purveyor of misinformation, dishonest to its core? So now everybody on TV has to pull out of their fucking shows or deplatform because in the same tube that you exist, they exist.
All right, so look, there's a lot there, and let me just say, like, I think Jon Stewart actually makes a lot of good points. I know some of you are definitely not going to disagree with this, and I'm already seeing this in the chat. But look, I think he makes good points, and this is somebody, again, you know me, you've been watching me, you know that I've been critical of Joe Rogan. I know that I've talked about his COVID disinformation. I think that's dangerous. I pushed back on it. I've talked about this, but I also believe that the deplatforming of somebody like Joe Rogan is actually not something that I'm going to be in favor of, versus somebody like Alex Jones, which I was actually fine with deplatforming. And it's not because, like, oh, I like Joe Rogan or listen to a show. No, I don't. But here's the difference, right? 100% Alex Jones is a bad actor. We know this. He's playing a character, right? He's absolutely a bad actor. He plays a character. He spread some of the most dangerous conspiracy theories that we have, that have gotten people hurt, that have gotten people stalked in their homes, calling the Sandy Hook parents crisis actors, and that, their children not really dead, right? All that nasty stuff, right? Alex Jones has done a lot of damage. Now, again, if you go to the COVID stuff with Joe Rogan, I will also agree that he has also done a lot of damage, right? But at the same time, Joe Rogan, I don't think he is an ideologue. I agree with Jon Stewart on that. I think Joe Rogan is a dumb meathead who basically reflects who he has on, who he's talking to at the moment. And so, that being the way that it is, he occasionally does have a good take. Again, I was never a big listener to Joe Rogan's podcast. I don't have the time for it. But I have watched and I've covered plenty of clips where he's had people like Josh Steps who push back on COVID misinformation, the myocarditis. I talked about that. I've showed you the videos where he pushed back and clowned Dave Rubin. I know that's not a really difficult to do, as Dave Rubin is a complete clown. But nonetheless, if Joe Rogan can still do it, and he's able to clown people like Dave Rubin, and that's fantastic, and I really enjoyed it. And so, look, he even had on people like Bernie Sanders. And so, that stuff, I've talked about that. I've talked about the good. I've talked about the bad. And so, again, we also have to look at the context, right? Outside of those numerous clips that do go viral, there's a 2 to 4 hour conversation. And it gets driven in some pretty strange directions. And I don't think for the most part that is entirely harmful. But I have expressed frustration, and where I kind of, a little bit disagree with Jon Stewart on this, is that I think it is perfectly fine to criticize people who platform other people, insane people, and don't push back. And of course, I think you do have a little bit of a responsibility as someone who has such a large platform, as Joe Rogan does, to be a little bit more careful who you platform. You know what I'm saying? And so, that said, I've given him credit when he platforms good people. Now, unfortunately, that hasn't been very often. In fact, my big criticism of Joe Rogan, other than, of course, the massive amounts of misinformation that he's put out against COVID, which, again, I agree is dangerous, is that he also platforms mostly right-wing ghouls and then agrees with them on some of the most insane points. And by the way, also, it's supposed to be like an entertainment podcast. Why do they keep weighing in on heavy political issues if they have no idea what they're talking about? Again, my big criticism's there. If you want to be like somebody who, takes mushrooms and then like bullshits for 4 hours with somebody, or, DMT, or just gets high and bullshits on air for 4 hours, that's fantastic. Great. Then why are you going to take that same show and you're going to talk about heavy political topics or medical topics of which you know next to nothing about, and all you're doing is Googling? And so that's my problem here, right? And by the way, when he does bring on some of these, again, these quacks, you had the guy that, Dr. Robert Malone, for example, who claimed that he invented, which that's not how science works, but that he's the guy who invented the mRNA technology. That's not at all true. And then he goes on and he pushes COVID disinformation about the vaccine, and Joe Rogan just agrees with him. Now, people will look at that and be like, oh, that just means he's a free thinker. He's an independent media person. He's an independent free thinker. No, he's not. By the way, being anti-establishment, it doesn't mean that you're a free thinker. It means you're being reactionary. Now, again, I'm anti-establishment from the left. I don't like what the establishment is doing in a lot of circumstances. But I also have trust in our institutions, some of our institutions at least, and I have a trust mainly in the science. And so, again, there's a difference there. But as far as being an independent media person, I'd actually argue against that. If you're paid $100 million by a big corporation, like Spotify is, to have an exclusive contract, well, I mean, again, and by the way, Spotify can give Joe Rogan $100 million for a contract, but they, when it comes to music, massively underpay artists who put their music up. That's weird. But anyway, if you're giving out those contracts, or if you're taking those contracts, well, then you're not really independent. You're a part of established corporate media. And again, why is he getting paid that much? Well, it's because of what Jon Stewart said, that he's not an ideologue. In fact, again, his ideology seems to change based on who is in front of him and what he can, or his producer can look up. And again, he's also getting paid because there's some sort of entertainment value in that show, because they're not strictly ideological. Now, of course, there's an issue here because of how many people he reaches, which is why I think that he's got to be a little bit more careful who he platforms, or at least push back on the nonsense, or invite, if you're going to bring on like some quack doctor, all right, fine. Then have the next guest come on and debunk his bullshit. At least you're having a more balanced conversation. I would like to see at least that happen. And again, he's got to want to actually do that and give that balanced perspective. Now, I don't know if that's going to happen. I think some of his recent statements are a little bit encouraging, but I got to see it first. But overall, to the point, no, I don't think it's a right thing to deplatform him. I'll disagree with that. But look, if you want to pull your music from Spotify, like Neil Young did, and I forget her name, Joni. It's not Joni Ernst, that's for sure. I just can't think of her name there. But if they want to pull it because they're uncomfortable sharing the platform, I perfectly understand that. That's totally fine. Again, they can choose where they want to host their music if they disagree. That's just allowing them to make the choice. And them pulling their music, Joni Mitchell, sorry, them pulling their music, that's, again, their choice. And it's not censorship. And so, and it's not deplatforming. And by the way, again, he's not Alex Jones. He doesn't say these type of insane and harmful things that Jones does, even though, again, massively disagree on the COVID stuff. And I think that is dangerous, and I don't want to minimize that. I just think that deplatforming him might actually do more damage than anything else. It might actually push him and his audience further to the fringe right and into conspiracy theories, which, again, that would be a lot of people. That would be a ton of people. In fact, I'm going to show you another video here of Jon Stewart where he touches on a point that is actually pretty similar about what really pushes people to the right.
Yeah. I'm more worried about the algorithm of misinformation than the purveyor of misinformation. Misinformation will always be out there, but if the algorithm drives people further and further down the rabbit hole, the fucking algorithm is the amplifier and the catalyst of extremism. And if you can, I would much rather fuck with the algorithm than deplatform and all these other things.
I think that right there is probably one of the most underreported but best points that I've seen. Again, algorithms. I see this all the time. Y'all tell me in the comments, right? I read the comments about how, like, oh, I'm watching one of your videos, and then I'm leaving on autoplay, and suddenly I'm watching a CNN video, and then I go from a CNN video to an MSNBC video, or go to a Fox News video, and then it gets further and further to the right, instead of showing things like, I don't know, Rational National Humanist Report, and, you know, lefty channels, right? And so we can see the algorithm at work that is pushing people to the right wing. Ben Shapiro, another good point. And by the way, people who sign up for, you know, YouTube and don't have like a search history or anything like that, what are the immediate recommendations to somebody who's fresh onto the platform? PragerU, Ben Shapiro, Daily Wire. I mean, again, that's how the algorithm pushes people into the right wing. That's the problem. That's the biggest problem here. And again, Fox News, one of the best examples, right? I can guarantee Tucker Carlson has said far more worse things than Joe Rogan ever has. Constant, not just COVID misinformation, active disinformation. But since Tucker Carlson's on Fox News and on legacy media, YouTube thinks, oh, that's okay, we'll recommend them. We're going to just recommend them. Fox, and the reason that they do that, by the way, is that Fox News's legacy, it's an authoritative source. Meaning YouTube, doesn't matter. They're going to drive traffic towards them and away from actual independent media. Shows like this, independent media lefty show, you know, independent leftist media shows on YouTube are constantly being deprived traffic because the algorithm does not show these videos to new audiences. Instead, they're showing Fox News, CNN, MSNBC, these authoritative sources, and of course, right-wing sources. And so again, the reason too is that you have the money that is on the right wing. They've got so much more money than anyone on the left has. I mean, think of it this way too. I've also heard complaints about, oh, Jeff, one of the ads before your videos is for a right-wing channel, or is for, it's a Donald Trump ad or something like that. Right-wing ads. What's the last time you saw a left-wing ad? Have you ever seen one? Ever? No, it's because the left wing does not have money to run ads. The actual left, actual independent media, who doesn't have a $100 million Spotify contract, guess what? We can't afford to buy ads. We can't. We don't have sway with YouTube. And the algorithm constantly works to shut us out while pushing people to the right wing, to the misinformation. And it's the same with all these other platforms, by the way, which I think is a much bigger problem than somebody just like Joe Rogan, who, by the way, if you were kicked off Spotify today, Joe Rogan would still be able to be fine. He could set up shop somewhere else, anywhere else. He could set up his own website and would still have millions of listeners. And so understand that that is the difference here. Again, I don't know the solution to this. It's a very tricky problem. But I can say that relying on algorithms influenced by corporate media, and I can say that deplatforming in most situations will not solve the problem of misinformation or disinformation. Now, again, if you're dealing with somebody like Milo Yiannopoulos, who's ever heard of Milo Yiannopoulos, right? Well, that's a case where deplatforming actually works. But when it comes to Alex Jones, he still has millions of people that are listening, and still, of course, has a pretty large effect, just not on YouTube. And so what I can say here is that the reactionary stuff that these platforms are doing in order to try to combat the misinformation that they see, well, I don't think they're really solving the real issue. The real issue that creates all of this distrust or all of this misinformation is distrust in institutions. And so the distrust in our institutions, science, education, government, etc., that really leads people to try to seek out reactionary content, which these algorithms are more than ready to serve up to you.